That came out this week. I'd like to talk a little bit about that, if you could, because I feel it was a generous act that you put this together. Maybe you don't feel that way. But the book that came out this week is titled
Iron Fists Branding the 20th Century Totalitarian State.
Yeah, that's awesome. Where did that come from? Because I have a little bit of a love affair with this book.
It came from the fact that I've been fascinated with how power is manifest in and through design, and how certain symbols and signs are impregnated with both good and bad force. Mm-hmm. And I did a book called The Swastika, A Symbol Beyond Redemption,
Yep.
A number of years ago, and that was the first foray into this. But actually there were other things that I had written that kind of feed into this directly and indirectly. I've been working on a project called Victims of the Image, which is about racist and ethnic stereotypes in American popular art. I was also, a Jewish kid from New York who was born only around the corner from where we are right now, and I was kind of fascinated by the regalia of the Nazis and of the Italian fascists. I went briefly to a military school, which I enjoyed for many reasons, although my political leanings are quite left, and I don't believe in war. But what's that gun you're toting? Even the Jordan River has its bodies floating. So this project was both this project was both a way of purging some fixations and fascinations. So in that sense, it wasn't generous at all. It was just,
I disagree.
I was obsessed, and this gave me an excuse to accumulate a lot of material that I'm now generously giving to the Wolfsonian Museum. They'll have an archive of this material, in part because I borrowed a fair amount of material from them as well for the book. But it's an analysis of graphic design and other forms of design, including exhibition and environmental design. It is using branding as the lens, because the term branding has become this buzzword within the design and advertising communities, and it's kind of taken on the mystical qualities that I hate most about our profession. And at the same time, that's what they were doing, these four totalitarian regimes in the 20th century, the Nazis, the Italian fascists, the Soviets, and the Chinese communists. They all used their leaders as trade characters, and they used the symbols that surrounded their leaders as trademarks. And it was about selling to a consumer. It was selling ideology, and it was ultimately selling a war, and it was, in the case of tragically effective, and ultimately selling hatred of one's enemy and of one's perceived enemy. So there's a whole rich well of material there that designers need to be aware of. And I've always felt that there's so much that goes on in the culture that designers are part of, but they don't take responsibility for. They're just, that's where the entrepreneurism thing comes in as well, because as an entrepreneur you have to take responsibility for what you do, what you put into society, what you put into the culture, good or bad. And as a designer, you can just be a cog in a wheel, and following orders. So
those magic words.
It all comes to around in a circle. Anyway, this book was designed by Projects in New York. They did a lovely job, wonderful job of making the pictorial material work with the text. Many of my books, I tend to not worry too much about coordination. And let the chips fall where they may, and this required more intensive care, and both Phaidon, the editors at Phaidon, and the designers did really a wonderful job. So I hope the book has some impact and has some response, good or bad. I mean, I hope it causes some sort of conversation.
You would say obsessive, I would still say generous in description, because your research work, particularly in the swastika book, or the work you do with the swastika in previous works, has a direct impact. And it's a funny story that my dad told me when I was a kid. My dad was born in the late 20s. So he was in grade school in the late 30s in rural North Dakota, which is, I mean, it really is 200 years back, really, when you think about the 1930s in North Dakota. He got in trouble in the schoolyard because someone had came around handing out little brightly colored pins to the kids. And my dad, as you know, a third grader, saw these pins and he put it on and he was wearing it with the rest of his friends, and they were swastikas. So somebody,
were they Nazi swastikas?
yes,
or
yeah,
other?
they were no, they were not Native American symbols of fertility or whatever. They were Nazi swastikas that somebody in rural North Dakota who had some sort of fascist leanings or had some Nazi sympathization, well, like not dissimilar to much of rural America, there was a lot of Nazi support.
Yeah.
And it certainly was the case in North Dakota. But my father, as a third grader, got in trouble because somebody distributed this little symbol of hate. He didn't know what it was, and he loved it.
Right. Interesting.
That's terribly effective.
Well, it's very effective. And similarly, I was walking down the street only a few blocks from here when I was 7 or so, and there was a boy who was a year or two younger than me walking with his dad coming from the opposite direction, and he kept raising his arm and going, "Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler." And as I passed by, I could hear his father saying, "Do you know what that is? Who that is?" He said, "Somebody like Shakespeare?" I mean, this was surreal. But, you know, it affected him, it affected me, it affected his father. You know, this was, the housing project around the corner is called Stuyvesant Town, and it's where a lot of veterans ended up after the war. So it's quite possible his father was a veteran who had been in Europe fighting the Nazis.
Sure.
But somehow this kid, just through whatever, movies or magazines or something, or comic books, took on this weird little hero worship.
Wow. Wow. And it was here.
And he grew up to be President Bush.
Yeah. Yeah, the strange cultural memories of Nazi sympathizers really continue to confound me. In Minneapolis, where you flew in recently, the big airport, the Lindbergh Terminal, Nazi sympathizer.
Oh, yeah.
The small airport, the Hubert H. Humphrey Airport, the liberal progressive. The tiny little airport, the liberal progressive gets that one. The Nazi sympathizer gets the big one.
Yeah, well, you know, America's a great place.
Yeah, the funny things here. And the new book coming out in the fall is titled?
It's titled The Design Entrepreneur, and it's co-authored with Lita Tellerico, who is the co-chair, co-founder of the MFA design program here.
Right on, and I look forward to it. Stephen, thank you so much for your time. It is an amazing honor to finally meet you. And
my pleasure. And did you just think of me as naked the whole time you were talking?
You know, actually, I think of you naked almost all the time.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
okay.
So it was not dissimilar to what I normally
Good.
think.
You're sick.
Thanks so much for coming to Design Smoke. And Stephen, thank you. I really appreciate it. Cool. All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.